Yes, you are.
All right, so here let's turn to Paul, bro. Let's turn to Paul because you said
No, 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 no,
you say you don't
no, no,
completely
no.
disregard Paul, right?
Listen.
Wait,
We
you
listen.
said
No,
you
no.
don't completely.
How are
All
we
the
going?
answers are in Paul.
How are we going
All
to
the
turn to
answers are in
Paul?
Paul, and this is
I'm
why
not.
you
Hold on.
don't. This is why you
I'm
say
not.
brothers
I'm not.
read
I'm
Paul
not,
because
bro.
if
Hey,
they read Paul,
young Don. You gonna have
to show is that God's commandments, the way to the kingdom of heaven has always been keep God's commandments, right? The commandments that were given to Noah, right? He was not expected to keep the law of Moses, right? Neither were the people under the law of Moses allowed to look back to the laws given to Noah and say, but you told Noah he could eat of anything. Why can't I eat of anything? Right. And so similarly, as the book of Hebrews says, when there has been a change in the priesthood, there is a change in the law, right? We have a new law.
Who wrote the book? Who wrote the book of Hebrews?
Most scholars believe it was Paul. But there's several books in the Old Testament that we're not sure who the author is. So
we have a way to reconcile that, right? Because there was an entire class of priests called scribes who are responsible for writing those things in the Old Testament. We don't even know who the author of Hebrews is. So again, that's even more problematic than the epistles in which we know are ascribed to Paul.
Right? He says, wait,
listen, brother, who again. So I asked you for the law of Christ, right?
Right. I gave it to you.
Why are we going to Hebrews?
Because I am trying to show you.
I reject that teaching in Hebrews.
Oh, all right. I forget. My bad. Okay.
When it comes to Hebrews, yeah, hell no.
Okay.
Now, why did Ox say that? Why did Ox say? And one thing I respect, I can't, even though he's pretty much just, dwindled the New Testament down to, the Gospels. And, I done seen him have problems with some of the Gospels and Revelations. I understand why they did it. Because that one West doctrine is not, it's not going to link up. It's not going to mesh. It's not going to harmonize with the epistles. It's not going to harmonize with the book of Hebrews. If you're saying, hey, we're still sacrificing and we, the temple ain't went nowhere, the priesthood hadn't changed, yeah, you can't deal with Hebrews. If you're saying salvation is only for Israel, then if you stop at, Matthew chapter 19, if you stop there, then you got a good point. You got a good point. But if you go into the epistles, if you keep going, if you go into Acts, it's not gonna harmonize. So, and that's proof of that, because these people, these Sacarii brothers, man, they're my brothers, but and they debate all day. Nobody debates more than they debate. And they've built up certain fences, certain defenses. They've put certain fences around their doctrine where they say, hey, we're not going past Matthew 5. Everything else, hey, we ain't good, man. I don't subscribe to that. And I really want to talk to is about because we try to blame Esau all the time. Well, why? Who gave him the authority to say this ain't God inspired and da 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 da. And most of us, if you ask us, okay, well, what are the requirements for you to feel something is God inspired? They were just saying, well, we don't know who the author is. Well, you don't know who the author is in the majority of the Bible. You don't know who the author is. And he said, well, to reconcile that, we have scribes. Well, Jeremiah 8 said the pen of the scribes is in vain. You had the scribes. You don't know who they are. We can say, well, somebody wrote Hebrew. That's all you're saying is somebody wrote it. Well, it was the scribes. Well, that's just, you still don't know who that is. You still don't know if that's a trustworthy person. especially when you have things like Jeremiah 8:8 in the text. So what are we doing? What are the requirements? What are the requirements? And this is going to, I said this before, man, it's probably a personal thing. You know, what are your requirements? Because if you say, oh, well, it was older, or it was written, was it written in Greek, or was it well, if it's only in Hebrew, if it was written in this time frame, like, what are your requirements for something to be authoritative? And for most of us, we just going with what, what King James, because we feel King James was God inspired, this God inspired black man, that the Holy Ghost actually was on the translators and made them translate that Bible. We spiritualized that particular text. And so we go with whatever King James had put in there, we put in there. And if he had the Apocrypha in there, he had the Apocrypha in there. But there are books that are older than those books that are in the Apocrypha. There are books in Hebrew that are older than those Apocryphal books. There are books in the Septuagint that are not in the Apocrypha, in those Apocryphal books. But we don't deal with them because we really don't have a methodology to how we're determining on what books are authoritative and which books are not. And he said, well, we can reconcile with the scribes. That's a weak reconciliation. That's a weak reconciling. If you just gonna say, well, these people called the scribes, they did it. Okay. Who are the scribes? Who are the scribes? Because, even the little hats say they got scribes from Babylonian time. Who are the scribes? Or why you ain't listening to their scribes? They said they had scribes. Why aren't you listening to their scribes? And then are they putting the writings of the scribes in the Torah? Do the writings of the scribes go into the Torah? And it's only a problem based off of your methodology. If your methodology is that the scribes wrote it and you agree with the scribes, then it's no issue. But if you're going to say, well, we don't know who did it, you don't know who, I don't know. That's just, to me, that still feels weak to discredit a text on not knowing the author, when majority of this book, we do not know the author. Majority of the text, we don't know the author. So, you have scholars say that Ezra wrote the Torah. And you could kind of see that with Nehemiah. I think that's Nehemiah 8, where they're giving the understanding, and Ezra wrote Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah is one scroll. They just divided it. So, if you don't have a methodology, then you shouldn't point to anybody and say, well, what's authoritative and what's not authoritative. All right, you can't even make that argument. You can't even argue with nobody. If the church pull these things out, you can't argue with them if you don't have your own methodology onto what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept. All right, you got to have your reasonings for every text that you're reading. If you're going to point the finger at somebody and say, well, why y'all taking these books out? Or you're going to point the finger at somebody and say, man, that book's not authoritative, man. We can't be reading that book. We can't be reading Joshua, Enoch, the book of Barnabas, all these other epistles that are out here. All these outside pseudepigraphical books, the book of Adam and Eve, the 12 patriarchs. You can't point a finger at nobody or no text until you have a methodology that you stand on resulting in what you feel is authoritative and what you feel is not authoritative. But like I said, these brothers done dismiss Hebrews, they done dismiss Paul. And like the brother said, most scholars think, I ain't gonna say most scholars, but scholars think that Paul wrote that, and some, still a lot to say they don't know who. They don't know who wrote Hebrews. I'm kind of on the fence there. I don't think that Paul wrote Hebrews just the way it's written. It's not a lot of questions and things that, like Paul puts in the text, like, well, what shall we say then? is God, is God unjust? Stuff like that. I don't see that in Hebrews. And that's just me. That's my personal, my personal opinion, my personal methodology on it. But just because I don't know the writer, I don't dismiss the text. That's not in my methodology. Because if I don't know the writer, I'm just going to dismiss the text. No, that's not, So it's to each his own. You know what I'm saying? But I think the epistles are a problem from One West teachings. And you may think these brothers are crazy, but they're not crazy. They have built up a fence so they don't get confounded. And if you're out here debating and you're going back and forth with people, you may come to the same conclusion if you're still under that One West teaching.
Okay,
Brother
okay. All right.
Young, do you mind if I ask